Guys, welcome to episode of the Kingdom Effect podcast. I'm Kevin Beasley, and I have my big buddy Glenn Buckshot Buckley. About that, Buckley, you like Buckshot?
Where'd you find that at?
I just came to my mind right saying that. But
No, that
hey,
that
if
was
you're watching this on the what's that?
that was really my nickname. What was Buckshot when I
Oh
was in
wow,
the
cool. Yeah,
military? Yeah,
it just popped in my head. But hey, if you're watching this on Facebook Live, Buckley looks different. Like I barely recognized him when I logged in here. If you seen him before, he's got the big bushy facial hair, and it's all gone. So said it's been what, about 5 years since you've had that hair off your face?
yeah, at least 5, if not more than that.
Yeah. Had your wife
Well,
seen you yet?
Yes, I actually went. I actually had before I shaved it all off. I left this really long kind of tombstone mustache,
That's funny.
and I greased
Handlebars
it
or no?
up. And
Oh yeah.
yeah. I was Doc Holliday, man, and I went and took her to lunch just so she could see it. Like she had no idea. She gets out of the car at the restaurant and just thought she'd seen a ghost. So
That's funny. I
then
don't know what I think yet. The jury's
I'm thinking
out. The jury's out.
I'm thinking I can see my double chin now. Is what I'm thinking.
You really do look 15 years younger. So, I don't know how you feel about that, but yeah, I barely recognize you. So welcome, guys. We've got a really tough topic to talk about tonight, but we don't generally shy away from the tough topics around here. So it's just kind of par for the course. But this January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and this is kind of our episode to acknowledge that and to be aware of what's going on out there. We just had a conversation just a few minutes ago that the amount of things that goes on right under our noses or right outside our back door sometimes just blows our minds. Buckley, I think we've talked about this before on the podcast, but Buckley often says if there's a hotel in a city, there's some form of human trafficking going on. So it's been a year for me of just realizing that at a new level, and it's taken taken a little bit of a toll, and just helped me just think through my children. My kids go to public school, and and what's going on around them. So I think the awareness is important. With nothing for us to fear, just something for us to be very aware of and diligent. So we've got a guy that I'm excited about. I just met him. I think this is the first time I've actually seen his face. But if you guys heard the episode a couple weeks ago on engaging abortion and racism with Scott Horde, Scott actually introduced us to Judd. We mentioned to him that we were looking at doing a show on the effects of pornography on our culture, and he mentioned Judd Granzow. So Judd's with us today. Thanks for being here, man.
hey, appreciate you having me. And Glenn, it's only taken me 20 years to grow this. I'm not.
Yeah.
So I'm a little jealous that you can really grow a good one. I mean, this
Yeah.
this takes me a while.
He has a good one. Judd's got a really interesting background, which I wasn't even all aware of. Drafted by the Dodgers in the 4th round right out of high school, and I'm assuming that's the LA Dodgers, so pro baseball player. Played football at UT. We'll forgive him for that. I guess we're recording here in Tennessee, so I probably shouldn't say that. I'm an Auburn fan, but played football at UT on the championship team in '98. And several other things, but founded multiple organizations for sports training. And then an organization called P3 Ministry, which stood for Peace, Power, and Purpose, and is currently a pastor, one of the pastors at Highland Park Church here in Tennessee. Tell us a little bit about P3. What was that all about, Judd?
Yeah. So I've had and first of all, thanks guys for having me on the show. I appreciate you letting me be a guest. Yeah, I did. P3 Ministries actually started. I have a big background in sports training, trained a lot of athletes. I thought, with a sports background, I love, what sports brings to the table and how you can impact a young person through sports. And that was kind of my goal. So I was fortunate enough to spend a good portion of my life training athletes, professional athletes, and, just trying to speak truth and help them achieve. My motto was, when you walked in the door, whatever your goals were, they became mine, and I wanted to help you get there. So had a lot of success, a lot of guys drafted to the NFL and, blah, 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 all that stuff. But the Lord just really moved me, and when you coach, you hear a lot, right? You hear a lot of what's, in the locker rooms and whatever talking. And I just felt the Lord came over me and said, either you're going to do something about these problems or you're just going to keep hearing about it.
It's good.
And it was really a wrestling match of the Lord. Just everywhere I turned, he was like, you need to make this move. And I had a nice career. I mean, wore sweats, t-shirts, lit every day, played sports, worked out, went home. Life was good. And then the Lord just radically just moved me. And I didn't know exactly what I was going to be, what he wanted me to do. But next thing I know, I found myself, I was being a campus pastor at a Christian school here in Antioch. And where I'm from, I was just starting to put little groups together and just kind of walking life with people. And it was interesting, whether you had a lot of money or you didn't have nothing, we all wanted the same thing as love. And I found that interesting, is that the two things we want the most is to love someone and be loved. And we have such a hard time doing that, right? And so a lot of the journey of my ministry was really about my dad. I was wondering, where was the Christian man when my dad was 40 that just grabbed him and saying, you are shipwrecking your life, and no one was there for him. My dad lived a lonely journey and ultimately passed away early, but he bought the lie of what it meant to be a man. Money, alcohol, women, whatever. So he fed his flesh with all that. And at the end of the day, always was one thing, was emptiness. And as I look back at his thing is where how important the father relationships. I didn't have a very good relationship with him, but I looked back and saw what his relationship was. And it's like, is this a generational curse? You know what I mean? And, a couple of questions that most men are lonely. They don't have a good friend in their life, just to, have a buddy. And they think these questions, am I good enough? What's my purpose? And a lot of times they climb this mountain and they get to the top of the mountain. It's the wrong mountain. And they're like, man, they've carried all this baggage. So I've had the privilege of just walking life with people and walking, them out of this and trying to show them, purpose, worth, and value. Where else do you get it from but Jesus? And so, a lot of men aren't willing to talk and share, and they don't have anybody. But for some reason, God has given me the ability. I've had more men come up and tell me and said, look, I've never said this before to anybody in my life, but I feel like I need to tell you this. And when someone says that to me, you talk about a great honor. And I always let somebody know, let me tell you something. You don't understand how you've blessed me and honored me, that you would share something that's so deep and personal to you that you feel, I'm talking about guys I met 5 minutes. I'm talking about, I've spoken at an engagement. They catch me in the hall and say, I need to tell you this. I feel like, and you know what? It's an honor. But then there's also an obligation to go, okay, now what do we do with that, right? Yeah. So I've just developed programs and communities of walking with men. And in my own journey, what does it mean to be a man? Ask most men that, and I struggle to even answer that. And so, Jesus was a deep well diver. Like, he went to the heart, and that's where, like, let's not live on the surface anymore. Let's go to it. And then the Lord moved me into just, all I kept hearing about was pornography from young people to all, and like no one was having this conversation. You talked about an uncomfortable conversation. So what I did is I made the point that I was going to talk about Jesus and I was going to talk about pornography. And it was interesting. I'm great at a barbecue. I'll go to one side of the barbecue and I start talking about porn. Everybody looks at me like, porn? And I go to the other side and I talk about Jesus and they give me the same look. And so I'm like, why is this so uncomfortable? So I tried to make an uncomfortable conversation comfortable. And I think starting the dialogue of that was really crucial. And so P3, that's when we started out. And then about 6 years, we just kind of like closed that up. I took a position as a pastor at Highland Park here in Nashville. And it's been great. I'm still doing the same thing. I'm out in the community and I got my net and I'm just fishing.
Yeah, somewhere in there as well, you had about a 2-year stint as a radio show host, right?
Yeah.
Which I was looking at, the tagline here was focused on men's issues with porn, purpose, and Jesus. I thought that was a really interesting.
Yeah. It was porn and Jesus every Sunday night. And man, I think if people would just know what the effects they'd have on you, both of them, they're life changing. And so I would bring on guests. The Lord just, opened the door for that. And I would bring on guests and we would tell their stories and we would talk about it. And we would talk about a lot of just, the harms and the damage it's doing. And so I wanted to be able to have a conversation where a father and son maybe couldn't have that with each other. But they could listen to some wacko goofball like me just talking about it all day, and all of a sudden it was like, for a while in my house, man, I'd walk in, my wife would be talking about it, my daughter. And so, but what happened is we educated ourselves. We saw what this was about and we could speak on it. Yeah. And as most people, when you mention that word, they get so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so I try to make that. You have to be able to talk about it because so many people, especially that. I mean, you can talk. Hey, I struggle with alcohol, pride, all
Mm-hmm.
this, but if you're addicted or struggling with porn, that's something that people aren't willing to share and really are
Right.
shunned, right? You know, a little bit. So, you know,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's shame.
so,
It can be a shameful topic to
yeah.
talk about for men, for sure. And then most people that listen to our show would know that Buckley has a history in law enforcement, and particularly for a few years working in the internet crimes against children, which you probably know as child porn. It might make a little bit more sense. That's a big chunk of what internet crimes against children. So, Buckley, I know you've shared before, but you might just want to give a brief overview. And I think this will be a fascinating conversation between the two of you because you both have such a foundation with working with this issue.
Yeah, I can remember my very first exposure to pornography as a teenager. It was back when uh, computers got small enough and cheap enough that you could have one in your house. And when the internet made that god awful fax machine noise when when you got on the internet, but I can remember it. Me and a buddy of mine from school. Mom and dad are still at work. We got off the bus, and but man, so much has changed over the past 2 decades, where the accessibility and the availability of the content that's out there in regards to pornography, and then the sexual deviance of porn
Mm.
that is available now. Used to, you always hear dark web, or you really had to hunt that stuff down. Now they throw it at you.
Mm.
And so there's really, in the past 2 decades, there's really been a huge transition in our society, and the porn industry is desensitizing entire generations to sexual content. And as we'll get into later in the show, that translates over into human trafficking.
Yeah, it's amazing now. I think we mentioned this a couple weeks ago, but uh, it's seemingly like on the outside looking in, seems like porn costs you absolutely nothing now. You get it, you can get it for free. It's right there, accessible anytime. And also it seems like it doesn't do any damage because it can be such a private thing, behind closed doors.
Mm.
So it seems like it doesn't cost you anything, but what it's costing our culture is it really is devastating. So
Well,
Well, here's what's crazy. If you got two guys, like, on the football team, and they'll show each other, hey man, check this porn video out I got,
mm,
and so there's not really, it's kind of weird because there's shame in some settings, but then there's not in others. It's almost like man, check this out, check out what I saw. And I think the shame may come from the addiction side of it.
mm,
Um, just admitting that you have an addiction to this, and because there's kind of that thing where, I'm telling a dirty joke kind of mindset from it, showing your buddies this movie or this show or this video. There's that side. I'm just telling a harmless dirty joke to be cool, and then there's the, man, guys, I'm struggling with this. It's ruining my
mm.
marriage. It's ruining all my relationships. So I think that might be where the line is drawn, from where it's shameful in this setting, but not in this setting, if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Yeah.
I think you make a great point. I'm in my 40s, so my first exposure, I was 6 years old. I can take you right back to exactly where it was. I lived on the Colorado River. My dad gave me a Playboy when he thought it was funny.
Wow.
We had to work as we got older, right? Like, it was the stack of magazines you'd get on there, and and anybody looking. But now in '06, when this, I don't know if I can go on the camera, this, our iPhones, right? I call it the porn box.
Mm.
83% of viewing of pornography is on this phone, right?
Wow.
And so we give young kids this weapon, and without any spiritual maturity, any maturity mentally, and say, good luck. And then guess what? It's so easy to go on settings and you can block all that. But we just don't. And it's like, man, I don't know. And I think, when you see from '06 and on, you talked about shame and guilt, Buckley, it was like, we have a generation now that shame and guilt has left the room. And that's like a nuclear bomb, because not only like, look at this of what, I'm showing you, it's actually enacted out with somebody now,
Right.
And this is where we're so, the culture is just going, this is what is expected. We just do this. I remember I was walking life with a young man, and he was into a lot of things. And I remember we were just talking, and I said, give me your phone. And he's like, no way, man. I said, give me your phone and unlock it. And I started kind of scrolling through his phone, and there was a couple of things going on in there. And I said, what do you think? I mean, I didn't stop on any of those pictures. I just gave back to him. And he said, I said, what are you feeling right now? He's like, I feel really shameful. I saw you. I know what you saw, right? And he said, this is the first time I felt shame about this, because I understand what you've been telling me about, how we look at people and treat people, right? And pornography and all this isn't a direct assault on God's creation, right? Life is sacred. When I look at somebody, I as a Christian, as a follower of Christ, I cannot go away from that. You are made in the imago Dei, the image of God, right? I can't leave that, right? So my job, I'm called to love that person that's in front of me. And what we've done is life is not sacred anymore. I mean, you can tell from, when you have Scott on there talking about abortion, but you can just see where we're moving, right? How we talk to people. And, and I don't know how old the study is. I remember reading something that, over 90% of the scenes are physical abuse. Over 50% of the scene is verbal abuse. Listen how people talk. I think I read a stat today that just on TV, cursing is up almost 70%.
Wow.
Again, we're living in a world of filth. It's a darkness. This is demonic. And I mean, we can go down that. I think anything that's not of Christ is demonic, but I mean, this is very dark. And and I don't think people realize that. And we've got a young culture now that's growing up. They just grow up with it. Their first sexual experience or anything is on a screen. I heard on the radio the other day that now kids as young as 8 or 9 are sending naked pictures to other kids that age. You're like, wait a minute. I mean, and so that's why I have a lot of respect. It's like, can't we just protect the kids at least? Can't we just give them a chance?
Yeah.
I'm an old guy, whatever my decision is, I know. It's like 8, 9? Really? And so
what you have to ask yourself too is an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, and even beyond, really.
Yeah.
But an 8 and 9-year-old, that's a learned behavior. So then you have to ask yourself, where did they learn it? Did they learn it from a friend? Did they learn it on accident on the internet? Are they learning it from, mom and dad's relationships and mirroring those, maybe older brother, older sister? So when you start, the younger you get, you got to start looking at it from the perspective of, okay, this isn't natural in the progression of getting older for an 8 or 9-year-old. So where did this learned behavior come from? Where did this language that's not age appropriate, where did that come from? Like where, and it's amazing when you start tracing that stuff back, all the different places that, TV, the internet, mom and dad, brother, sister, uncle. It's just all over the place.
Yeah. I mean, I don't watch much TV, and I can't imagine what's going on TV right now, but it's like, I think about this is, and I told you this is, I believe this is demonic and it's assault on God. There's porn companies that use specific names that are biblical. But what's an interesting fact is that the number one day of watching pornography is on Sunday.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, man, so like I said, is we see this as maybe on the surface of two people having sex on TV, whatever, that's their business. But man, it goes so deep, so much deeper than that. John 10:10, the thief comes to kill, steal, and destroy. Well, put the word porn in there. Porn comes to steal, to kill, and destroy. And when you think about that, I mean, lives, marriage have been taken. Young kids, old kids have died. And the abuse that we're just promoting. And you hear any politicians laying their life down to say, man, this has to stop? Like, they know what's going on. I mean, I don't know. If you don't know what's going on, how about this? 115 million people, this was, I believe, a year ago, visit a porn site daily. One porn site, 115 million people visit that on a daily basis. What do you think? What do you think's going on in their minds, right? Like, what are we teaching them? you know.
Mm.
And I look at a lot as an athlete is, you know, we watch film. I remember growing up, Magic Johnson and Michael Jordan. It's like you saw them on TV and you wanted to act that out, right?
Yeah.
Well, the same thing is going on here. There's no kidding, right? It's not just they see this. It's in their mind. These images in their mind, and at some point, that progression, Buckley, you know about this. It's going to be played out, and that's what I'm saying. You want to stop sex trafficking, you stop the pornography business.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about fighting human trafficking. We looked at it from a two-pronged approach. So one was fighting the business of human trafficking. So the active trafficking of people. And then we looked at it from attacking it. Okay, now we have to attack the consumer. So, you know, we would go out and set up dates with people that were being trafficked online, rescue them, hopefully arrest the trafficker. But then we'd also turn around and do what we call a reverse sting, where we would place an ad, pretend to be someone selling sex on the internet, and arrest the consumer. If you don't attack it from both ends, you know, if you only attack, because here's the thing, you can attack we'll use porn as an example. You can attack the production of porn. You know, we can all get on podcasts and radio shows and TV and talk about it, but until we get rid of the consumer, we change people's minds from a consumer standpoint. People will find a way to get it, just like when you were a kid.
Yeah.
You know, if it wasn't, you know, the magazine at the gas station on the internet, it was the JCPenney catalog, you know. So you really got to change people's hearts, because we'll go find it wherever it's at.
Sure.
So I think attacking the consumer side of this is a big piece as well, and educating people on how the effects of porn, you know, not just on the heart from a faith perspective, but also on your mind and your body from a biological perspective, and how that infiltrates all of your relationships.
Yeah. If you think about the male brain, that, you know, still developing up to 25. My wife says mine's still developing, but you know, I mean, so you take a young kid and you introduce it, you know, he gets introduced to porn at 12, and then he's got a decade of this as his mind is still trying to process, you know, and growing and learning. And all of a sudden you don't see humans anymore. Everything's an object. And, but I agree. I mean, you think about the amount of money that's made in this industry, and I'm thinking, what are people paying for with all this stuff that is free? I mean, just the power and the money behind this is it's unbelievable. And yeah, I mean, I'm glad we're having this conversation. I really am. If it helps one dad go talk to his son or him, you know, because you just think about, like, I gave you that John 10:10. It steals, man. Porn steals the best. Anytime you're watching it, you're not being the best husband. You're not being the best father. You're stealing the best you can be for your family. And you're calling, if you're married and you got kids, that's what your calling is to lead them, right? And I mean, I just think, man, it's gnarly, man, and it's definitely, I'm glad we're having the conversation.
I just don't see, if you have a daughter, especially a daughter, but I just don't see, if you have a daughter, how you can watch porn and not think, man, that's somebody's kid. That's somebody's little girl, you know? So like for me, that would instantly take away any pleasure from watching something like that. Cause I'm like, oh man, that's somebody's, that could be my daughter, or, you know? And so, yeah, man. And it's those guys that recruit, I'll use that word, that recruit these people are just, man, they're manipulators. You know, they get a hook in you, and next thing you know, you wake up and you're trapped, and you're in this industry and you can't get out.
Wow. Yeah, that goes back to the market that we talked about, that the fact that there's such a huge market for it, the consumer side of it. We talk about Tammy a lot. I hate to talk about her again tonight, but with Scarlett Hope in Nashville, that goes into the adult entertainment clubs, but those ladies make very, very little money that night at the club dancing, but that's kind of their pool where they can pick up jobs for afterwards, you know, and meet them elsewhere. And that's where the money is. And also their internet platforms. So that's just like, it blew my mind the first time we talked about it, and I realized that those girls dancing in those clubs, they're going to take home just a few dollars, but that's actually their marketing tool. Like that's the place where they market themselves to where they really make the money. And yeah, when there's, there's money to be made in it. And there's a lady that's, her husband left her, or she never was married, but she's got 2 kids at home trying to feed. It's like extremely difficult, to let go of that. So it's all driven by money, right? Which goes back to the consumer side of things. But while we're talking about kids, this is a great time to ask the question, I think, that from your 2 guys, is because I struggle with this. I have 2 teenage boys, and we've had a few talks, but I really struggle with, like, what questions do I ask? What do I say to these boys or girls on either side? So have you guys walked through just these conversations with your children, and how did that go?
Yeah, I've so my kids grew up hearing me preach on it all the time, right? So it was a constant, in their developmental years, it was like they heard the raw stories, or they would come and, they'd be sitting when I'm talking to a group of people and would bring this thing up and take it to a different level, right? And and so questioning is always is, especially I've got 2 kids. I've got a son and I got a daughter, and is just saying the harms of what this is doing, and why would go to something like this. You know what I mean? And like I said, there's something. I think there's obviously as a young boy, the urge to look at that, right? But where does it take you? Because every time you watch it, it's like you're laying a railroad track into a dark forest, and every time it gets you deeper and deeper. Good thing is you can lift those back up, but it's all around you. It's all around you, and you hear about it all the time. So the conversations are just to be going, listen, hey, I'm your dad. I love you. My job is if I really love you, and you understand what the word love is, it's to provide and protect. And that's what I'm supposed to do. Uncomfortable conversations need to be had because I love you, right? If I love you, I'm not going to just give you a phone and not put a block on it, right? You know what I mean? And this is why I'm going to do it, right? And so a lot of times it was kind of the why behind it, right? You're a beautiful young woman. You should be treated like that. And most likely, if you have a boyfriend down the road, they're going to be exposed to that, right? But I want you to have enough respect and for what God made you to be, right? Like, and that's why, a lot of people, the numbers of women watching are going up too, right?
Yeah.
And so, and we can talk about that, but talking about our kids is, I think, being able to tackle and have these conversations. It's like, I'm putting a block on your phone because I love you, not because I don't trust you, because I love you this much. Are you struggling with it? Time out right now. I don't have to be dad, but for 5 minutes, you can say whatever you want, and let's just have that conversation. You're not in trouble, right? Because I think there is a shame to it, especially, just look, as a dad, even though I didn't have a great relationship with my father, I hate saying this. I don't say this with pride. I say this because this is what it was, it's a womanizer, and it's just like, but he's still my hero. As a kid, you don't want to let your hero down. And so to say that there's any kind of failure, that you have any struggles, right, is for a young kid is like, man, I don't want my dad to know that. And go, and so I think deep-rooted love in there, and just go and hold him and say, man, when Jesus came out of the water, God the Father said, this is my dude. I just love him, right? The affirmation from a father like that is just amazing. And it's not, I love you because you do this. I love you because you're my kid, right? And I think they need to know that. You don't have to do anything. You don't wear perfect on the back of your shirt. You know what I mean? And so I think even talking about your own struggles, because they think you're perfect, right? I think helps very good. What, you struggle with that, Dad? Yes, I was 17 at one time too. I wasn't always a pastor. I still struggle every day, by the grace of God, And so I think having that dialogue is just important. Like I said, those conversations can become easier.
Yeah, I think it's even harder for, Christian or faith dads, because it's a different issue for the kids, particularly wanting you to be proud of them. So I really try hard to be a safe place for both my boys. And, I have 5 children. So, but my boys particularly, I try to be a safe place. But yeah, it can be a challenge for sure. So I think,
I'll tell you one thing, Kevin, is, sex is just not something that it's still a taboo subject in a lot of families. Even, the dads or the moms are even embarrassed to have a conversation with their kids about it. All the guys dread the dreaded dad son, birds and the bees conversation. But, I think that's part of the problem is our kids are learning their definition of sexual relationships and what a healthy sexual relationship looks from is coming from everywhere but where it should come from, and that's from us. And it shouldn't. The reason I think those conversations are so hard to have is because it's not really talked about at church. It's not something you have a lot of conversations about, and so it's still got that taboo. Oh, that's such a private. That's such a thing. I think Judd, you kind of hit the nail on the head. When I go and teach, speak to students, it was always about, how to protect yourself on the internet, because part of internet crimes against children was also protecting yourself against, real life predators online, not just the pornography. And I used to tell parents, I said, look, education equals prevention. I said, because at the end of the day, you can put all the blocks, everything you want on the devices. But as soon as they get on the school bus or go over to little Johnny's house, little Johnny's got devices whose parents don't have, blocks on there. So you've really got to educate your child. And I used to give this kind of comparison was, when my kids started driving, I taught them, hey, you got to wear your seatbelt. This is why you wear your seatbelt. And I've got to trust that when they pull out of the driveway, they're going to put their seatbelt on, because I'm not going to be able to watch them the whole time they're in their car to know they have their seatbelt on. So I think, Judd hit the nail on the head. It's all about conversation. It's all about dialogue, and it's all about educating our children today that, hey, this is what God intended when it comes to sex and relationships. All this stuff you're seeing on TV and the internet and your buddies are talking about at school, that's not God's plan. And so, as believers, son, daughter, this is the right thing. This is the plan that we want to follow. And you need to guard yourself against all these other things. When you're at a buddy's house and they pull out the laptop and start watching porn, leave the room, call me, I'll come pick you up. I think we just have to teach them how to guard themselves from it, because I think at the end of the day, it's not going anywhere.
It's here to stay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times in a lot of aspects is we're unprepared how to answer and talk about it. Right. But when you think of just the beautiful act of what sex between a man and a woman in a covenant relationship of marriage is, you are creating an eternal soul. I mean, I think that is radical. My one cell and my wife's one cell just created billions of cells, right? That's that process. Right. And that birth is an eternal soul. And that's sacred. And I don't think we look at it that way anymore. You know what I mean? And so I think, man, what a wonderful thing that God created that I can experience with my wife, right? And look what man is doing to it.
Yeah. Well, it's so easy to go up to your kid and say, hey, just say no to drugs, don't smoke crack, don't drink and drive. Why can't we say don't watch porn?
Yeah. Yeah. And here's why. Here's
so difficult.
Yeah. I mean, if you would just, I would play a lot of interviews with actual people in the industry talking about what it's done to their life. So you're going right to the source, right? And if we just would talk about that side more, and I know there's this clip, I think it's, maybe in the late 70s, it was Ted Bundy's. It was the last interview, and he focused on that. Now, I don't know what angles he was working. I don't know why he would talk about it, but you look at the progression of what he does and how he talks about it from a young kid and how it played out. Just think about that. If someone said, you know what, I'm going to take that serious right there and go, man, this is what the damage was. Think how many lives would have been saved in this world. Think about how many marriages would be saved in this world. Think how much abuse would stop in this world if we would take this serious. But it's almost like now we have a culture that promotes it as a good thing. And I remember it was a high school, it was a clip, I don't know the high school, but they played a theme song to some porn site and the whole gym erupted. They all knew it. They all knew what was going on, and it was celebrated.
Wow.
And I think that's what we're getting as we celebrate. You know, I look at it as sin, but I mean, you know, we can talk about a lot of different things. But here's one thing I just, you know, just a little bit about the parenting is, and I really try to stress with my kids, it's not what dad's called you to be. It's what your Heavenly Father's called you to be. And, you know, there's so many points is you're going to be able to find and do what you want to do, right? I mean, let's be honest. But is that who God's called you to be? And so my job now as my kids get older is, you know, I've walked in front of them and I've brought them through life. And now that my son's a man and he's moved on out, my job is not to tell him what to do. Hopefully I've laid that foundation. When he comes to me, my job is not to help him make a good decision. My job is to help him make a wise decision, right? And that's where the role has changed a little bit, where I've been in front with my kids. Now I got to walk beside them a little bit and try to help them in their process. Because, man, you know what? You got to lay the foundation, and you got to pray that they're going to be the decision that God wants them to be.
That's good. Hey, why don't we take a minute to talk about, because I've heard both of you guys talk about this, and I always find it fascinating, the progression and where it does take you. You know, I think we've got to have an awareness of that in order to even share it with people. But two different angles. One would be the fact that pornography has the same effect on your brain and your chemical makeup that drugs do, right? Because we mentioned earlier, what's the organization, Glenn, that you mentioned? The new drug?
Fight the new drug.
Fight the new
Fight
drug.
the new drug.
So yeah, just the effect it has on the human brain and chemistry, and then also the progression that you often see where you know, whatever someone's doing is not satisfying enough, so they just take it a bit deeper. I think that's always a fascinating conversation.
Yeah, you know, porn has the same effect on the brain as you know, cocaine or, you know, crack or whatever. I kind of, to me, this is a better illustration. If I had a buddy of mine, he owns a car lot, and he has Corvettes, and he puts me in a Corvette one day, and we're going down the 4-lane over 100 miles an hour, and I'm like white knuckle gripping, you know, the side of the door. So that gave me that dopamine dump in my brain, and my adrenaline's going. But you put Jeff Gordon in the passenger seat of the Corvette with my buddy going down the 4-lane, he's over there taking a nap, you know. And so it's kind of the same. It's kind of the same thing with porn. You know, when you first start consuming porn, just a little, or what we might call softcore porn, you know, that's enough. That does it for you. That gets you the dump in your brain. And then after a while, that doesn't do it anymore. You know, you're like the NASCAR driver. Now I've got to kind of graduate, so to speak, to hardcore porn. And after a while, that doesn't do it. So now I'm going to seek out maybe different types of fetishes, right? Maybe, you know, I've seen a lot in cases that I've worked. There's a big incest fetish going on right now between like stepdaughter, stepsister, that kind of stuff, or maybe a certain race or a certain type of porn. And then after a while, that doesn't do it anymore. And now you progress to porn that's got some type of violence in it, whether it is acted out or it's real violence portrayed. And then after a while, you just have to keep climbing the scale. And I call it sexual deviance. You just have to keep diving deeper and deeper into the sexual deviance to get that same high you got the first time you watched. And Judd, what do you think? Is that you see the same thing?
Man, you're spot on. Like, you know, I always say it's heroin through the eyes. It's abortion of the soul when you watch pornography. And like I was talking about, is that railroad track into a deep, dark forest. And you're right. You know, you look at it when the Playboy magazine doesn't work anymore, right? What do? Like, just like you said, so there's this progression. And at some point that progression is going to be acted out or child pornography, right? I mean, everybody will say, look, I'm only going to go this far, you know, and I'll stop. I'll never go past this line. Well, when you get to that line, all of a sudden, like you're saying, the dopamine rush ain't happening anymore. So you got to go to the next railroad track and the next railroad track. And then all of a sudden you're so deep into it, you're like, man, like that's what I'm saying is no one starts out. I don't starts out saying, you know what, I want to be arrested. I want to have a career and I want to be arrested because I have child porn on my phone. Like, or, you know, I'm videoing, you know, this is where it takes you. And that's what I'm talking about, the darkness and all of a sudden is there's no compassion in your heart.
No.
You know, and you see them as, how can I use an image bearer of God for my pleasure? And that's what that's how I start looking at it, is that's what's going on. And all of a sudden and we don't see him as image bearers of anything. We don't see him as a son, a daughter, a husband, a wife. We see it as, what can it do to fulfill me? And guess what? They're empty even after that.
Yeah.
They're empty after that. It's like, and that's the thing. It's the double-edged sword, man. Yeah, it pulls you and it leaves you so unfulfilled and so empty. I've not heard anybody tell me and said, you know what, every time after they're like, man, I'm guilt, I'm shame, I feel so empty, I feel so worthless. Now tell me that's the life you want to live? And that's what that's the results it's producing, man. And that's really sad, man. That is really sad.
I'll tell you a good example. We back in, I guess it was early 2000s, maybe 2008, 2010, a lot of the guys started coming home from overseas, from Iraq and Afghanistan, and they were coming back with child porn addictions. And the reason that was, we found out as we started, you know, busting these guys and interviewing them, was they were getting exposed to it on deployment, because that was, you know, child porn is legal in a lot of those countries. So they're getting exposed to it and developing that addiction. And then coming home and can't shake it, you know, and still seeking that out when they got home. But we saw a huge spike in our military personnel coming home with the child porn addictions.
I remember,
Glenn, I find that interesting real quick, because here are men that are laying their life down to protect and serve, right? And they, you know, to go to that, they're in that extreme, to see little kids, man, I mean, wow, you know, that's an interesting correlation right there, to think about the heart set of is, I'm going to lay my life down for my country, you know, and seeing that and how it pulled them in. That's
wow. You think about it this way too. You know, we talk about the dopamine dump in porn. You know, just if you're a soldier and you're running around getting shot at all day, and you got the weekend off, where's that dopamine dump going to come from? It's going to come from pornography or somewhere else. And so in seeking out, I think because I've been in the military too, and I think in seeking out that adrenaline dump, you naturally go and try to seek that out in porn, but yet the only porn available to you was, you know, underage, being in Iraq or Afghanistan.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. That's, man.
I remember, Buckley, you've said a couple times that when you would dig into a hard drive when you were investigating internet crimes against children, that you could almost every time tell how long a person had been kind of addicted to porn based on the type of porn, and you'd see kind of a regular progression of categories of porn, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You could look at the quantity of someone's collection, and also the content, you know, kind of what stage of porn they were looking at the time that we talked about before. You could almost always guess, because a lot of guys too would hide their child porn. So you might go all the way up to bestiality on the computer, and you go, okay, there's a hard drive hidden in the attic or in the wall somewhere that's got child porn on it, because if you've come this far, you've gone this far. And so yeah, without a doubt, you could, you know, it's, I guess it's good because it made me good at my job, but bad just in general was, you know, I got so good at looking at porn, you know, I could kind of read between the lines, so to speak, and really, which was really important when we sat down to interview, you know, these guys, because I knew how their brain was working. I knew what their psyche was. I knew why they were looking at this. And you could tell. I tell you this, you could tell the difference between the guy that would hop in a van with free candy painted on the side of it and go out here and pick up kids, and the guy that just got into watching child pornography or got exposed unintentionally, I guess. You could tell the difference from their porn collection.
Let's talk for a moment about, because I know, like, if I'm a guy and I feel pretty trapped and I kind of have an addiction that I feed the beast often or whatever, like, all that stuff we're talking about sounds really scary, right? So I don't know if you have an example of some guys that you've seen backtrack and walk out. Maybe that's a question for Judd. Some guys that you've really helped kind of reverse the issue. I think that might be an interesting thing to know.
Are you asking how they reversed it, or just what was the cry for help?
Yeah, both really. Like, just, yeah. How does maybe have a really encouraging story about a guy, and then what did he do? How did you help him? How did he backstep out?
I'll tell you just a quick one. I had a young guy call me over the break, asking me some questions about a business he was getting into, like an interview. And before he hung up the phone, he said, "Hey, I want to thank you." I said, "What are you talking about?" He's like, I didn't realize it at the time how much, when we were in our groups talking about pornography, like how it really affected us and what it was doing. But he's like, I go back to our talks over and over. And he's like, I'm free right now from it. But he's like, I'm actually talking, and this guy's 23. He's like, I'm talking to all my friends about the devastation of it. But so, I mean, that was just like, a story of just hearing, like, going, you know what, planting those seeds actually to see the fruits down the road were so important. That's, I think, and that was just in a conversation. But one, men coming in and saying, okay, look, this is where I'm at. This is consuming my life. And when you find out there's always a deeper root of what that is. And I think some of that's a byproduct of it. Porn's always there to love you, right? You basically are God. You're served, you're worshiped, you're wanted. I mean, that's screen. You're it, and that's what ultimately what I think it becomes. But the fact of is going, you know what, man, can you really be free in this world, in this culture, from this, right? And I think this is the number one. I don't think it's hidden. I usually say it's the number one hidden health hazard in the world, but now it's wide open, right? Like I said, with those stats of how many people are watching it, right? But the encouragement is saying, you know what, to help someone walk into freedom, and you're 30 days into it, and they're like, man, I see things so much different. Everything's so much clearer. I don't want to be that person. I can see where that was taking me. I would sit there and they said I would sit there and zone on the screen and nothing was working, and where it was taking me. And then to see, like, the freedom from, every day you're not watching it, I think it's a victory, right? And to have that progression. But I know this, I don't think you can do it on your own. And I don't think you can do it through the flesh. I always say this, flesh can't beat flesh, right? It's through the Spirit. And that's why I think it's so important, is that I know that, through the Holy Spirit, and people are like, man, you're crazy talking about this, right? It's interesting, though, in Galatians, the first thing it says is that the flesh and the Spirit are always in conflict with each other, right? And your soul is hungry and it wants to eat. And so I think when we understand is the first thing it says that our fleshly desires is the word sexual impurity, and the word is porneia in the Greek. It's interesting how those connect, and that's the first one. But I think is when we start acknowledging what that is, and we start really having conversations about that and showing that, you can be free from this, and help walking them out of that. And you're like, man, you might have saved me jail time. You might have saved me from losing a job. I mean, when you see these stories of men and what happened is, like I said, they didn't start on that path. Like, they didn't say, you know what, one day I'm 35, I want to be busted, and I'm a high school, principal, for pornography or doing this. It's like, that guy didn't start out that way. That's where it took him. And so, and just to see that, man, that they can live in real freedom, and it's not their willpower over it. It's actually their what I say, in Christ, and that they know who they are in that, first of all. I'm not saying they won't struggle or have those temptations, but you know what I mean? It's worth the fight. It really is to have freedom. But yeah.
That's
I
cool.
don't know if I gave you a success story. I just gave you a bunch of kind of stories.
No, it's great. It's good stuff.
Yeah.
Buckley, we probably need to wrap up. It's longer than usual, which is awesome. It's been great information. But, we said we wanted to do this particular episode on Human Trafficking Awareness Month. Why this topic, which is, how does this relate to the whole human trafficking side of things?
Yeah. Before I answer that, Kevin, we can even cut this into 2 episodes if we need to.
Yeah, good point.
But yeah, I think so. Two different places, and I kind of touched on this before. One is the the recruitment side of this. A lot of these, especially females that are in the industry, are brought in under some false pretenses, right?
Mhm.
Hey, when you see a lot is, you'll see an ad in a mall or in the paper or these days on Facebook. Hey, come be a model. We'll fly you out to California, and and it starts out that way, and then it just progresses, and ultimately you're in the pornography industry. So there is the trafficking part of that, and what's really in the past few years is professionally produced pornography is not the big hitter. It's the amateur produced pornography that has the highest trend today. And so you've got professionally produced pornography that's kind of somewhat regulated. There's US code and things that regulate that, but your amateur stuff, there's not any. And so there's no regulation. And so you're free to do what you want. So I think you see a lot more forceful, by definition, human trafficking in that sense. And that all goes back to technology and the internet and just how accessible and available it is to the common person. Then I think you look at it from the consumer side. when we will pay to see certain things acted out on screen, we'll also pay to go have sex with somebody that's being sold on the internet. Eventually, like we've talked about this whole episode, the pornography doesn't do it for us anymore. We actually have to act out on what we see, and a big step of that is, getting on Backpage and setting up a date and going and doing that. And so again, if we have to attack both sides of it. We have to attack the production and we have to attack the consumer. And I keep using the word attack on the consumer because I'm still in my law enforcement brain. But, attack also translates into, ministering and discipling, not just arresting.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that's it. I think we have to attack the production because women are being drawn into this fictitiously, women, children, men, and ultimately in some cases being forced to keep doing this. And then the consumer. If you think about it like this, Backpage was a huge website that we were able to rescue a lot of trafficking victims through. But if there was nobody purchasing the women on the other side, then there's the traffickers aren't going to traffic anybody because nobody's buying them. They're going to go back to selling drugs or whatever it was they were selling before. And so if we can cut down on the number of consumers, we can cut down on the number of people that are being trafficked.
That's a great point, man.
That's good. So let's wrap it up with this last question. And we usually ask some form of this question on all of our episodes because I think it's so important actually, let me back up a minute. We'll come back around and do resources. Might have to cut this, Glenn. Let's ask this one more question. We usually ask some form of this question on all of our episodes because a big chunk of our audience care enough to actually do something about it. So for guys like you who have invested your life and given away a chunk of your life to trying to help other people through these really, really hard emotional situations, how do you take care of yourself? Like, what are some things that you integrate into your own life that just helps you stay healthy yourself?
You know what? I spend a lot of time in prayer. I spend a lot of time in the Word. I spend a lot of time with my family. Brings me a lot of joy, right? Joy is, I don't look for per se happiness. Happiness is a feeling that comes and goes, but joy is rooted deep inside of you, right? And so things like, what porn takes away is, when I see my daughter or my son or my wife, there's a joy in there, right? And that's what porn steals from you. And so the more things for me that, whether I'm just hiking, with buddies, I think a community of men is so important. I think men desire and want to have that relationship, right? And hanging out, talking, And so for me, that's what I want to do. I want to make sure my spirit is strong first and foremost, but I want to have good men in my life. So I have men that are 45 that are 10 and 20 years older that at any time I can call, man, I go, man, I just need to vent something out. I need some wisdom. I'm saying hang out with some gray hairs as I got a bunch of gray in my beard. I'm a gray hair now, I guess. But it's like, man, these people have lived what I'm getting ready to live through. And so I think that's important. I think you've got to be able to step out and make sure you're healthy, right? Like, because if your cup's empty, you're no good to anybody else, man. You're just on the surface, man. And especially in this, man, you've got to have a full cup. And because that's what the Bible tells us, it should be overflowing, right? They should see that in you. So, I like to listen to podcasts. I like to just listen to men talk about life and relationship like that. So that's for me.
Buckley, we've heard from you a couple of times on how you guys handled it at the police station, but one thing you've said that's been really insightful for me is you got to know when it's time to take a break. So
yeah, and because I'll say this, make no mistake whatsoever. If you are going to get involved in any type of kingdom work to fight trafficking or fight pornography, it's, make no mistake, it's going to affect you. To what extent, that goes back to what Judd was saying about how your support system and all that. What was your question, Kevin?
Yeah, just how you take care of yourself, and
but
particularly your insight about you got to know when it's enough, like when it's time to just put the
sad part about it is, usually by the time you realize it, you should have realized it, a year ago.
Yeah.
Because the effects that this stuff has on you, it sneaks up on you. It builds up over time, and the people around you will see it long before you do. I can remember spouses and friends, calling me out on things, and I still didn't see it, And so I think it's again, it all goes back to what Judd just said: surrounding yourself with godly people that can help keep you accountable and can call you out and say, "Hey, man, listen, I can tell something's going on. Let's talk about it." And you just reach that point where you go, somebody gets your attention, and then you sit there. And I remember asking myself the question: is me not taking a break worth losing all these relationships or damaging all of these relationships? And for me, it was my profession. So it was a question of, do I quit my job? Like, that was my solution, and man, that's hard to do after 13 years, quit your job. But it got to a point.
Hey, Glenn, can I jump in there for a second?
Sure. Yeah.
And just as you said talk about quitting your job, and that's hard to do. Do you feel like that became a little bit of your identity at all?
100%.
Yeah. And I think that's I'm glad. Thank you for saying that part, because I think as men is our identity gets wrapped up in that. And so the one thing you were asking me, Kevin, is like, what I do. I've learned the power of the word no. I don't take every meeting. There's a biblical rest that we should have. And if I'm not in vertical relationship, everything else is hosed, man. That's how I look at it.
I'll tell you a story about identity, Judd. You guys probably can't see it, but I've got tattoos all over my arms, and 99% of them are faith-based on a story from my life, but they're all from the elbows down. And I didn't start getting tattoos like that until I was in the ICAC, Internet Crimes Against Children field. And years later in therapy, good buddy of mine who's a therapist, not Thomas, but another guy that I would go see, he actually pointed that out, man. He said, do you think that you put those tattoos where everybody could see them because you wanted people to know who you were? Like, you're not just the child porn guy. You know, you're this guy that loves Jesus and loves, you know, all these other things that are represented on my tattoos. You know, because I could have gotten them somewhere that they're covered by a shirt, you know, or whatever. But I chose to get them where everybody could see them, and I'd never thought about that. But you know, looking back at it now, I'm like, man, that's it. Because man, I couldn't go anywhere. I'm from a small town,
Yeah.
so no matter where I went, oh hey, you're that child porn guy. Let me talk to you about what I think my kid's doing. You know, so you were always known as Buckley, the child porn guy. You know, and so yeah, absolutely, the identity thing was a huge issue.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, when men can start calling men up, you know, calling up, and you know, sometimes being called up doesn't always feel good.
Yeah.
But if you love that, the reason I'm having this hard truth conversation is because I see something great inside of you. And so for us as men, we don't like understand, like we're like, oh man, I just got called out. I'm, you know, and you're like, but when you can embrace being called up and embrace a calling, you start, there's a security of that you become, what you understand what it means to be a man, not only a man, a godly man. And I think we have so many people that we kind of just I don't want to hurt feelings, but it's like, if I truly love somebody, I'm going to do whatever I can to help them and protect them. And sometimes those conversations don't feel good at that time. But when you can explain that, the reason I'm having this conversation is I see greater things in you than what you're doing right now.
Yeah.
You know, and so I think more men need to be willing to be bold and have conversations like that. So, you know, I think we do get wrapped up in, this is who I am. Like, you know, when you announce, like, every time I speak somewhere, like, you kind of, the bullet points I gave you, it's like, well, yeah, this is stuff I did 25 years ago. I can't run a sprint without pulling a hamstring. Okay, I'm not a football player anymore. But I love Jesus. You know, I'm a broken human being that is, you know what I'm saying? And that's like, okay, there you go. So I think, man, if we could just get honest with each other, that would be a great start.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank both of you guys for being honest and open on this episode. It's really great content, so we appreciate that. And on behalf of the Kingdom of God, I just say thank you so much for giving your lives away to serve others. I know you'll hear at some point, well done, good and faithful servant. So I'll just say it right now. I'll say it on behalf of Jesus. So thank you guys for what you've done. Hey, do either of you guys have some resources for some guys that might want to get some help?
I would say a good place to start. We mentioned fightthenewdrug.org. That's a good place to go get some information about what pornography really is, and how it affects your brain and your body. From a faith-based standpoint, man, I would say reach out to, you know, Judd on Facebook, myself on Facebook, you know, you, Kevin, a pastor, you know, somebody like that. I don't really know of a ton of faith-based resources, so to speak. I know there's some books out there, but I haven't read them, so I don't really know of any to recommend. Judd, do you know any?
Yeah, there's a great ministry called Tin Man Ministry. Guy's a former pastor and does a great job with that. But I would encourage anybody, any man, to purpose, worth, and value. You only get that through Christ. Root yourself in God's word. Let that be the authority of your life, and you will watch and see how the chains start falling off. I never, you know what? It's so hard to get people to read the Bible. But I'm telling you, son, when that becomes your authority, you will read it completely different. But I would say anybody in your local church, but that's hard for men to go to your church and do that. But I mean, find somebody to reach out. But I love the Fight the New Drug on the internet. There's a ton of stuff, material on there, but really knowing who you are in Christ is the most important thing I can encourage somebody to do.
Yeah, that's great. Also, you can reach Buckley and I at Kingdom Effect Podcast at gmail.com. That's right, Buckley?
Yep, that's right.
Kingdom Effect Podcast at gmail.com. And we always, if we can't help you, we can always refer you to some really great people doing really great work. So awesome, man. This is so good. I'm going to have to process it for about the next 48 hours and just kind of soak it in before I start editing it and hearing it all over again. So thanks so much for joining us on episode 8, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks, Buckley and Judd Granzow. It's a great episode. See you next time.